We are creating the world we're now living in. We are competing in. We are repeating in. We are believing in. It's time for us to shift our mind from best in the world to best for the world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. It creates a new world to mind a shift, intentionality, perceptuality, conceptuality. We are choosing to shift our mind to best for the world, best for our world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional.
Wow. Good morning, Erika.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here with me today. We are supposed to talk about leadership in this 21st century.
Exciting.
Very exciting. So,
Yeah.
yes. So, what about saying something about why we are here and talking about this? So, my name is Maria Appelqvist. I'm a university professor at Malmö University. I am program director for leadership and organization, a bachelor program. And since, I would say 20 years now, I've been on the quest of understanding leadership in various forms. And what took me there was the question, why is some leaders not being responsible, taking actually responsible for the leadership, both on not only formal leaders, but also on the personal leadership. But I also saw how formal leaders were hiding out from actually being responsible for their formal leadership. So that's me. And Erika, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Erika Michelson, and I have been working as a news journalist for over 20 years. But I quit and started to write books and making, actually started a publishing company too. And I also worked with the film as a documentary filmer and making short documentary movies too. So I have also been writing books about more about like people in different situations and in cultures. I'm also an educational leader for art, an art course called Vedic Art. And yeah, well, that's about it.
Yeah. And I think we both can agree to the concept of going from like being best in the world to best for the world. Because I think that's our mission. I also work with understanding our psychological needs. And I know we are sharing that. You and I, Erika, we have the needs of development and the needs of contributing. That's really important needs for us. So I think I have something for you that you will find very interesting. And I'm going to share the screen so you can see it with me, because I think this would be a very good point for starting our conversation. There is this book I saw, I found a time ago, and the starting point for this book is a quotation I've been using long time. It's Einstein's well-known quotation: "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them."
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the ultimate for leadership, right? How do we get leaders to think in new way? And that was the starting point for this book that was actually presenting a whole theoretical way of understanding what they called regenerative leadership. So the purpose was to actually inspire for a new leadership paradigm and create a new model, which they call a regenerative way of living and leading, where purpose, people, planet, and profit can thrive collectively. So it's a multiple disciplines coming together in this understanding, from biology, sociology, psychology, anthropology, neurology, and using different kind of methodologies. And here we also have something I know that you are very, very fond of, and that is biomimicry, to actually taking it from the flow of understanding nature. And this is the tree departures is coming from. And I think we could actually have this as a conversation. The first is how we as human beings have separated ourselves from the nature, how we also separated ourselves from the nature. We separated also men from women. Let's start there, Erika, and talk about that.
Yeah.
And I will stop sharing. Yeah, so the separation from nature and the separation, how we separated ourselves, women and men, because there was a time women and men were living together and supporting each other, but there became
Exactly.
a period of separation.
Yeah. What I learned about somebody called Barry Long from Australia. He was a spiritual leader, and he said from the beginning, women were love and men were supporting love. That was their task. But at some time, men left that task and started to get interest in other things. And that was the first time men and women separated. And instead of being love, we talked about love. We were not love. And that's, I think that's a very big reason why we separated. And it was when we got in from the beginning, we communicated with intuition. But then when we started to speak, that was when the big separation was, because then we talked about things like we do now instead of being the things that we wanted to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that is one of the things. And also I thought that there are a lot of people talking now, even if you're not religious, it's also separation from God. Yes. Nature and God, I mean, that's similar, but it is a special distinction when you talk about God. And God is you and me. So we are actually separated from ourselves.
They'd say we are a mind, a body, and a soul, right? So we have these three things in us, and if the soul or spirit is our connection to God, I think there is the separation. And I mean, I myself, who represent a profession, we can actually call it a profession of coaching industry, have expanded enormously. And I think one of the reasons for that is people want to connect again to their soul. And that's really the benefit of working with a great coach, is they have the capacity to take you into that deep connection of your soul.
Yeah, and that is also the absolute importance that we connect with our soul, because otherwise man will lose herself. So that is very, very important. I think that's number one, because if we are not connected to ourselves, how can we take responsibility to be a leader? And how can we take the personal responsibility for what we are doing and deciding? So it is very, very important for the human race, actually.
All relationship starts with yourself. And also what I'm hearing you saying is how the connection to like here, so I'm getting this, I think we're living in a life of transition, also getting new kind of occupations maybe. So, I mean, going to psychologist or therapist is, you're coming from your head, you're talking, you're talking, it becomes a way of listening to yourself.
Yeah.
And usually, like, it's not the connection to your soul, it's about it's problem solving, which a lot of science is all about, right? The science have the starting point of solving problems, and if you don't have a problem, you don't have a scientific issue. No. And that's what I love with this book, is actually they're taking a different perspective. They're saying that, but okay, so how can we build a theoretical model of understanding this? And that is opening up for the possibilities.
Yes, it does. And also, I think it is important that we use our spiritual, our soul, because we are living in a society now that actually has been separated from our souls as well. And that means that's why we have those. I would not like to talk about problems. I would like to talk about possibilities because we have now the possibility to change what we have started to create in this world. I mean, the climate change, the pandemic, everything, these are possibilities for us to create a totally new world. And that is so exciting. It's actually not something terrible. I mean, of course, it's terrible that people die, and it's terrible that animals and the environment is suffering. But I think it is, the beauty of it is we have a second chance, but actually we really need to take that. We need to take the lead of the new way of thinking.
And maybe this is like, and that maybe that's like the pandemic is actually a gift for us in that way.
Exactly.
Like it's instead of like, it's a gift because it's creating a new awakening for who we are as human beings, but also how we want to continue living our life. And
exactly, because the nature doesn't need us. Nature, we have seen during this pandemic that nature is thriving when we are not engaged too much with everything, and that is a call for us to understand that we need to connect with nature and follow the principles of nature too, because then we take the good lead, then we take the good responsibility for everything we do, because that is also what nature does. Yeah. So it's actually very, very simple. We just have to look. I mean, now it's people are very interesting in this biomimicry. That was a hard word to say, but anyway, because it is it's very many, a lot of studies that is about this. And for example, Japan uses a mushroom to, and this sounds so crazy, but it is actually very intelligent. But they use a special mushroom to understand the best way of creating a subway net during over in a city. So it is very, very interesting, all those things that people are looking into or discovering during this well, late last year, and the last 2 years they have been doing this a lot. So that is very interesting. So it's rather new that we do this, and I think that is very interesting.
Yes. Let's go back to the screen again and see all the other. So I'm actually going to show you the pictures. I didn't want, but actually the book describes the whole history in a way from research, how this transition happened from when we were having and living in that connection with nature to actually coming into the separation. And in that time, in that ancient time also, how the people were in the ancient cultures, they were connected to the earth, like they were worshipping Father Sky, right, which was the masculine, and the Mother Earth, that was the feminine, right? So they were living in harmony with the environment, but also with the principles of the masculine and feminine being represented there. And that was with the separation, the area of separation can be seen as a way of the radical shift that happens in climate. So it becomes with that a development of our ego, because in order to survive, our ego had to get stronger. So self-agency and self-empowerment in that. And that created a kind of cultural shift where also the feminine and masculine principles were left out. And instead, we have the area of militarization, conflict wars, exploitation and domination of other people and countries, right? So it was this really, and another thing was the development of Christianity, where God himself became separated from the nature. So what was embedded in nature now became religion that was external from us. And that was also something that happened during the Middle Age time. And with that also, if you not were claiming on to that religion, then it was fear and more like influence, control, and fear becomes part of our physical bodies, you can basically say. And in that, of course, everything that was not representing and thinking about God, but actually still worshipping the nature, become seen as forces of nature equals the devil. And then we have the whole area of the witches were actually on fire, because the need for really separating the devil out from the humankind. And I know you can say something about that, because I know you have connection to fire burning of women in Sweden, on a very central place in Sweden.
Yeah, it is a place in north in Sweden that is called Västernorrland or Ångermanland, and where we had the worst cases of witch burnings. And they are presented in a book called From Darkness to Light. A friend of mine wrote that book, and I also have worked with them making a documentary about this time. But also it's very important, because there were not only women that were killed, as they were accused of being witches. I mean, there are no witches actually, because the word witch is something that men, the patriarch society has been calling them, and that is a terrible word, because that is also connected to this situation. And there were not only women, there were a few men who were supporting their women and their children, but also I think about what you spoke about just now, Maria, it was also the indigenous people. And the indigenous people is all over the world very much connected with Mother Nature. And so this is a typical thing that when the power of society needs to get more power, they suppress those people who are actually showing that the connection with nature is important. They have to suppress them or eliminate them. So even here in Scandinavia, we have the Sami people who are indigenous people, and they were also killed using their religion that was a connection with nature, and where they saw nature as a living entity. So I think that this is with the witches, there was the same thing, and it was not only here in Sweden, but all the way through Europe.
Yes, all over the world. Exactly. So I think that's why I think this book about regenerative leadership is so groundbreaking, because it's giving, for me, it was like, oh my gosh, they have created the whole theory of understanding what's going on. So are you curious to get into the next section of what's here?
Yeah.
So as you can see, this was a lecture I was doing for my colleagues once. So here we have actually have also the qualities that exist within us, because the feminine traits and the masculine traits, energies within us, becomes part of this understanding, which was during the time of enlightenment. Of course, with enlightenment, we also have the science separating knowledge from the previous esoteric tradition, where the esoteric tradition had a combination of the masculine and feminine with science. It became now like rather survival of the fittest in the Darwinistic terms. So in some way, the rational analytical reductionist that became so like paving the way for science also created our thinking. And with that, we came to a separation on a whole new level, because now we had separated ourselves from the nature and creating a world of competition. We also created this separation and disconnection from ourselves and how we relate and behave in our society, in business, and in politics. And that means that we are so I would say that this is traits that actually creating also some kind of collective trauma in human beings, because we had an increase of fear, individualism, consumerism, and it's like this just emerging that way, and we haven't still healed that way. And that was the second thing, was to understanding how this separation took a whole bigger picture in our society in general. So what are your thoughts of that?
Well, I think everything you talk about is very good. I also want to add media,
Yes.
because my last work area, and that is very important, because we also, this competition situation is always supported of media, and media is also a very egocentric what shall we say, area. So you support the ego when you are the fittest, when you are the winner, when you are the leader, and when you are well known, not to forget, then you are supported by media. anyway for a while before they take you down, but that's another story. So I mean, media is really actually emphasizing what you are talking about. So, and that is also a way of empowering. I'm not talking about empowering people, but or more like emphasize what this society is about, and they make it very clear what is good and what is not good, and that is from the ego perspective, not from the soul, not from nature's perspective. It is the human beings being the ones who are supposed to take leadership or owning nature. I mean, we are owning land. Where do you see in nature boundaries of lands? So it's very interesting how, and if we want to see what is happening about human beings and leadership, it's very interesting to watch media, though I don't actually advise you to do that because it's very depressing.
Well, this is like words are energy and thoughts are energy, and
Yes.
what happens when you're watching or listening to news is actually it's all these negative occurrences, and
That's
fear.
why. Yeah, that's why I quit in news media. I worked at this national level in Swedish television, and one of the things that was very important for me was hoping that my contribution to the world was to find out about the bad things, and then the good guys could come and solve it. And it took me about 20 years to realize that was not the case. When it was solved in one area, it was popping up in another area. And it was when I learned about the law of attraction, that was when I realized that this is not the way to change the world to being better. And I actually wrote a book called Good News for a Change. And I think that is very important that we realize that even words carry energy. So not only when we talk about things and when we focus on things, it's also very interesting and very important that we think about what we are talking about and what words we use. So it's it's very important.
It is indeed. So it's let's continue to the third, because I want to also share the solution they're having.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the separation from nature, separation from ourselves, and then the third one is how the domination of left brain hemisphere took over the right brain hemisphere, and how the left brain and right brain have different purposes for us. So in that context, we can see that the left brain is all about the rationality, the analytical thing, problem solving, while the right brain can see more the broadening, open system, seeking context, seeking connection, being more creative, right? So there is this development of how I love this quotation from Hutchison and Storms, that is the author of the book. The qualities of the left hemisphere have enabled us to form a civilization based on advanced technology, rationality, mechanistic sequencing, and control. This way of processing gives us a sense of power and domination over our world, which is alluring and comforting, yet It reduces down our capacity to perceive nuances, relationship dynamics, subjective feelings, and the bigger picture. This is to say, it shuts us down from the realness of life. And for me, who also work with the importance of pleasure and finding pleasure in our body, I know how extremely difficult it is for people to even talk about their feelings, because people don't know how their body feels like, because it's unknown territory. So we are so living from our left brain that we have lost the connection to our feelings.
Yes, and that is something you see when you have these courses in Vedic art, because when you are using the right part of the brain, I mean, contrary to the left, then we increase the creativity in people. And it's not a coincidence that, I mean, 95% of the pupils attending these Vedic art courses are women, because in the patriarchic society, we learn to not use our feelings because it's not good to use it. You should be ashamed if you have too much feelings and showing them. So therefore, I think it's a very important way for women who mostly use the right part of our brain mostly, and it's important for us to be able to release this pressure from the left brain, and also it's and that increases creativity not only in art. It starts it increases your creativity in your life. Therefore, it's very important to use the right part of the brain. And what is sad is that for many years in Swedish schools, they have taken away the education about art, or drawing and those kind of things from the first grades of school, and that is sad, because then the people need to paint more, need to use their creativity more, and that is also very important for leaders.
Yes.
So therefore, and also it is for learning. It is stated, there are studies showing that if you want to learn, then you need to use your right brain too, because when you learn, you use your left brain, but you need to have a balance between right and left brain. And so that is very important.
Yes, and when you're actually saying that now, I just have to find this quotation, which I loved in this book, but now it's probably gone. But that was really about how important it is to actually find your. It seems like it wasn't there. It was a different one. But how important it is to be open for re-educating ourselves, that our life consists of re-educating ourselves, reinventing ourselves. And that's also a task for leadership, I think, because it's all about how can you be flexible, open in this complex world we're living in. So let's go to see what
can I just say something, Maria, about this topic also? I would like to add what Dalai Lama said, a quotation. And he said, the world will be saved by women.
Yes.
And that is why it's so important for the women all over the world to be able to step forward as leaders. Because there was an article in a Swedish newspaper telling about that the 8 female leaders in the world have handled the pandemic better than the countries that had men as leaders. So it's not about, it's not a war between men and females. It's more like we need to wake up the femininity in men too, because we all have both feminine and masculine in us. So for now, several thousands of years, we have used the masculinity domination, and we need to change that and start to approach the world with both feminine and masculine.
Yes, and I think that is one way. I think that is one of the reasons why they're talking about in this book also about the difference of understanding the left and right brain hemisphere, because here we can see how the left brain is all about me or you, the separation. It's linear, it's causal, it's focused on the parts, structure and order and polarization, while the right hemisphere is about oneness. It's systemic, it's relational, it's try to seek and understand. It's out-of-box creativity, so it's seeing true tensions. So it's something about what it means to cultivate the right hemisphere, and there I think your Vedic art is actually a good example of what it means to develop the right hemisphere also. And we have this, I love this TED talk with Jill Bolton about the stroke of insight, the TED talk where she actually describes the brain researcher, what happens when she have her stroke, and she's describing that connection to the universe and how big her soul is and how she wants to be part of that oneness.
Yeah. And there's also a Finnish scholar that is talking about this, and he's called Matti Bergström, and he talks also about the importance for children to be able to use both brain halves. And especially with the emphasis on the right brain, because that is it's actually a need to have the right brain active in order to be able to fully use your left brain, and that is learning. So he's talking about schools, that we need to understand the importance that our children need to learn and have the possibility to use creative things in school. Drawing, painting, singing, dancing, all those kind of creative things are very, very important in order to learn.
Yeah, and that's why I think system thinking as a way of thinking, system thinking with one of, I think that among the origins that took it to understanding organizations, what Peter is saying, because it helps us see that we have to think in new ways, and there are specific models for how to do so. So that's one. We have a rise of system thinking that's towards the journey of reconnection. The other is to see that in order to have a sustainability, the inner and outer has to go together. We can't focus on sustainability out there. We have to also focus inside ourselves.
Exactly.
And then the third point is to reconnect to life and see that we are actually part of a greater whole. And that's the disconnection that was describing in this book. So basically, what I loved with this book of regenerative leadership was it was giving this whole like theoretical framework of understanding why it is looks like it is. So the thing is, how can we change it? So they mean we have to go from the old reductive way of thinking, and here we can see how like the hierarchies and we see organizational structure, right? And the necessity to go to a living system logic and actually break free from this logic of looking for problems and instead trying to see what is the possibility, or how can we think in new ways. So that's one thing. So it's going from an old way of thinking, which was based on logic and rationality, which is mechanic and cause effect, ego left, masculine outer focus, to a more logical of life, where everything is interconnected. And we have system thinking, system awareness, and ecosystematic awareness is part of this. And this is like a mind shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, and as you said, that Vedic art, the painting course, it's not actually about the learning the technique of painting. It's learning to understand yourself, and also that what you are talking about, myself in the cooperation with society and with everything. And when you do one of the principles, it's Vedic art is 17 principles, but the first principle you learn is the one how you use automatically, without having been taking any course at all, how you use when you start to move. When you talk in telephone, you have a pen and a paper, you sit there and you scribble. And if you see your first drawings, you can see that it is a system of movement, and it's either circular like serpents like this, or it's like an 8 lying 8, and that is the connection with universe, because all those movements we have in universe, all our cells are copies of cells that you have found in universe. So using this way of creative painting, not so much using a technique, but using just to call out your soul and put it on paper, so to speak, that is a way to connect with a line with a big picture. Yes. So that's very interesting. We do it naturally.
Exactly. And, I always, the first one to represent consciousness, and talking about we have to raise the bar for consciousness. So here we can also see that like this self-awareness like goes up and down in some way, and then systemic awareness goes also up and down. And then we have this point where this regenerative leadership consciousness can actually take form and start to generate. And then we come into the question, like, how do we transition into this living system and being part of that? And then they speaking about the importance of understanding the logics of life. And that comes from presence, coherence, patience, abundance, and silence, and dance. So it's about basically how we show up as individuals, right? And what it means to be, now we're coming to like, what does being authentic mean? A lot of time we are, and also in workplace, and also leaders, they go to work, they play a role, they become like a profession. They upholding masks and roles instead of actually being their authentic self and coming from that presence of who they are.
You maybe remember how successful Ericsson were at the end of the 70s. The Ericsson telecom company, they were very, very successful, and they had a leader who encouraged the people who were his employees to start to meditate.
Yeah.
And everybody, they had like thousands of employers, and think of what that did to the production when all those many thousands of employers were meditating every day. And that to meditate is known to higher your consciousness. And when you allow that, when you encourage that, that means that you are also not only helping yourself, but also the people around you. So what would happen if everybody all over the world would start to meditate? Just that. It would be a great opportunity to see what change we make in the world.
Yeah, it's so true. And just for elaborating more on what the meaning, how they're thinking of the different words, what it means. So with presence, it's about understanding how to like nurture this deep relationship to your own inner self and see that you're a part of the world. Coherence is about being aligned with your own authentic self and acting with your own inner guidance system, so you can actually be coherent with your own inner guidance system and follow that. And patience.
Yeah, it's also made studies what happens in with the human brain when you meditate. And one of the things is just increasing coherence.
Yeah.
So therefore it's actually scientifically proven.
Yeah, a great tool for taking you there is meditation.
Yeah.
So patience is about being at ease and being open and not being reactive or defensive or pushy or judgmental. So patience is being staying open. Silence is about giving full permission to the space of silence and let that silence nourish you. Often we're feeding ourselves with music and impressions and listening today podcast or Clubhouse, like there is like all the time conversations or music is going on, but there is a power of tapping into that space, and that's also what you do in meditation. So it's all good. Connected. And then abundance is about the mindset that everything is possible. If you're open, there is rich possibilities out there. And the dance is again like tapping into this rhythm life and living that and developing that depth within.
It's also very important, I think, to talk about love.
Yes.
Because this is also something that automatically happens when you heighten your consciousness, that you realize the importance of love. And, fear and love cannot coexist. So, and today, I talk about media again. I'm sorry, but they talk a lot about things, that make people afraid. And people that are afraid are easy to rule and to make them do things. And that is a very, very, I don't know if you think about it today, because we have been so used to that. But I mean, just step back for a while and think about the pictures when you see people on TV with all those masks. I mean, there were not such a long time ago, a year ago, we were discussing to forbid people wearing those hoods, that we call, that a lot of criminals used when they were robbing the banks.
Yeah.
And now you go into a bank with a mask and everybody thinks that is totally natural. So, it is important to use love as a tool for creating a new situation in the world. And if you are using love or being love, mostly, that is most correct expression. If you are love, you're not afraid.
No.
And if you're not afraid, you usually stay very healthy. You know, if
Exactly.
you use your sensibility, if you are caring about others, it means that you are keeping the distance in a good way, but not keeping a distance to another human being, you know?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, fear and love can't exist, so you're either or. And I think the old paradigm was fear, and there is a new one which is embracing love. So, you know, I'm all about conscious love, and I wrote a book about it. Did you know that I created a relationship intelligence model, Erika? Since you brought it up, I have to show it for you, because this can be used in intimate relationship, but it also can be used in workplaces because it's covered everything. So this is how it looks like. And you see, you have doing there and you have being there. But you also see that things that you will say would be like other models will have communication is actually lying outside here on the other side here, communication, because you're coming in from communication, you're coming in from having agreements, you're coming in from being responsible, right? That's the access point. And then you see I have actually topics like sex and polarity and void there, because that's things we have to do, and that happens when we're not aware of this. That's why sexual abuse happens, and we have a Me Too movement in workplace, right? So this relationship intelligence model is super great for understanding more.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's time for us to finalize here.
Wow,
Last
time flies when you're having fun.
Time flies, yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me, Erika.
Thank you. It's a great start of the day.
It is.
Talking about
Thank you
this.
so much.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.